Hola, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a El Tamayo en Casa. Estamos haciendo una recopilación y revisión de las exposiciones que han sucedido en los últimos 39 años en el Museo Tamayo. Y hoy estoy muy contenta de darle la bienvenida a Lynne Cooke, que en este momento es Senior Curator de proyectos especiales en arte moderno en la National Gallery en Washington, D.C. Lynne fue una curadora invitada que realizó la curaduría de la exposición Elipsis, que conjugó por primera vez el trabajo de Lili Dujourie, Chantal Akerman y Francesca Woodman a finales de 2007 y principios de 2008. La entrevista será en inglés, pero los acompañamos, los invitamos a acompañarnos a través de los subtítulos que estarán en este video. Y bueno, voy a darle la bienvenida a Lynne en inglés. Well, welcome Lynne, and thank you for being here with us in El Tamayo en Casa. It's for us an honor to have you here and to hear from you, from yourself, your experience at Museo Tamayo with Elipsis. So I was telling our audience that you were guest curator for the exhibition Elipsis in 2007 and the beginning of 2008, and how this exhibition brought together for the first time the work of Lili Dujourie, Chantal Akerman, and Francesca Woodman. So I wanted to ask you, how was your first approach to Museo Tamayo, and how was the process in preparing this exhibition?
It wasn't my, well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to do this dialogue with you. I have such good memories of the exhibition and the several times that I participated in exhibitions at the Museo Tamayo. So this wasn't the first time. I actually worked on two solo exhibitions, one with Lawrence Weiner and the other with Fred Sandbach some years before. These were small exhibitions, but site-specific concentrations. And so the Elipsis was the third and came about somewhat differently from the other two. I was invited to make an exhibition in Lund, in Sweden, and I had long been interested in Lili Dujourie's films, which she'd made early in her career, and then once she began making sculpture, the films disappeared and weren't known for a very long time. And they were something I'd worked with Lili, and I knew about them, and I was always interested in them. And then I worked with Chantal Akerman on another project, and had become interested in some of her very early films, which were, again, not particularly known. They were not feature films. They preceded Jeanne Dillman's very famous film that gave her international renown. And then there was Francesca Woodman, who was really well known in the US. She had died very young, really not long after she graduated from college. And she was known for these extraordinarily inventive photographs she made of herself in her studio at Yale, or sometimes with friends, female friends mostly, and mirrors and masks. And they were about, as I read them, the play of identity. And the maker, the artist, the female artist, looking at herself as subject and object. And of course, Francesca Woodman's work had often been later paired with Cindy Sherman's. But I was interested in thinking about it from a different perspective, and thinking about it in relation to Lili and to Chantal, who both addressed themselves as stereotypical female objects of the artist, and that there was a separation by approximately a decade between Lili, who was born, I think, in 41, Chantal in 51, and I think Francesca Woodman a decade later. So you had three women who had very different careers, but they all worked with photography and film, sometimes briefly, sometimes exclusively. They did not know each other. They didn't know of each other's work, but the same subject kept coming up. And of course, it does come up with Cindy Sherman, and it has continued to come up with other women artists. But how the artist takes on the paradigmatic role of what would normally be the male artist looking at the muse, his nude female subject, and how when the woman becomes the artist, how she looks at herself in this dual role.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I wanted to ask you about the concept of ellipsis. It's part of the cinematic language, narrative language, but also in relation of this medium, no, the medium of the camera with the bodies of women. What do you think about this?
I think it's got multiple meanings. It's often hard to find a title to an exhibition, and I don't think I always do find a perfect title, but in this case, I think it really was.
Really was.
And yes, but it was very fortunate. And the ellipsis is the cut and the suture that brings something together as if nothing is missing, or it's a gliding over something. But there's also ellipsis in as a punctuation mark in literature, in writing, where it's the three dots. And it can mean in a quote that something has been left out, and but it continues as if the quotation continues as if nothing's missing. Or it can come at the end of something and it just opens up in an unfinished way. And I think that in these pieces, the question of what's left out and how time passes and how identity is elided somehow. It's bracketed in some way. So we don't know quite whether we're looking at a model or a muse or the self or a portrait or simply a studio model. Yeah. And how all of these roles are kind of tied together, and where role playing and identity come together.
Yes, I mean, this the thing that it's everything that's left out of the frame, I think in this exhibition is very important.
Yes, exactly.
And I also wanted to ask you, what is the importance of having collective exhibitions entirely constituted by women artists?
I think they can play different roles. I think that the beginning of second wave feminism in the late 60s and 70s, women wanted to make shows about women artists, sometimes with an historical overview, to bring to the fore women who'd been left out of the standard histories, the canon, and to argue that one, in some cases in the late 60s and 70s, to argue that there was something identifiable about art made by women. I don't think we tend to believe that any longer or feel it's of interest. But there are other reasons, I think, sometimes for putting, if there's additional reasons, not because of the gender of the maker, but because of what's in the work, what's being explored and examined. And I think that there's enough similarity and affinity in what these three artists were considering when they made their work, that the fact of their own gender is it's relevant to the subject, but it's in the work, it's in the dialogue between the works that that issues are being explored, not in the gender of the maker as a biographical fact.
And could you share with us maybe an anecdote or a favorite memory in Museo Tamayo?
Well, I love the architecture. I think it's a really extraordinary building, and that the open plan and the multiple levels mean that one can look across and see things relating, speaking across space in a way that's very, it's very rich, and it's also very engaging. And you watch other people watching art, and you see yourself participating in a communal experience, in a form of sociality, that the looking and the sharing of the space as a viewer with other viewers becomes very much very dynamic, became very dynamic with this show because it was looking at bodies and thinking about who looks at who and what does the act of looking at another person, does it objectify them or reify them, or where does it recognize them as individuals?
Precisely, my last question was about, well, this was a touring exhibition. What was special about Museo Tamayo for Elipsis?
It was special for me in several ways. The audience for each presentation was different. It was in Glasgow, Lund, as I said, and Mexico City, very, very different places. And I think the light and, as I said, the dynamic character of the space and the youthful nature of the audience too. The Tamayo audience and the spirit of the museum is young and lively in my memories. And I think that made it very special.
Well, thank you very much for all your comments and for taking the time to have this interview. Elipsis is a very important exhibition for Museo Tamayo, and we're very glad to have you in this space, Tamayo en Casa. Maybe just to close, I'll close in Spanish. Muchas gracias a todos por ver esta entrevista. Mi nombre es Andrea Valencia, soy coordinadora de exposiciones en el Museo Tamayo y les agradecemos mucho tener este momentito para hablar de Elipsis en el Museo Tamayo. Gracias.
Gobierno de México.